So here it
Yep.
is. I start the recording and I will go to slideshow and from the beginning. And what I do here is I just want to review really quick because you didn't, especially you that didn't see the video, the last video, that the methodology itself is a three-level hierarchy. Okay, so it starts with the 5 process groups. This is really, Joe. Oh, by the way, is there any way that you can, cover the phone or something if you're not talking? Because I want to try to make the video. Thanks. You know what I mean? The quality of it. And that sounds good right there. Um, anyway, the top line of the methodology are the 5 process groups here. All projects, all projects have elements of these 5 process groups. This is how I teach the methodology, Jill. Across, I will show you the processes as they apply as we take our mock project across. Well, I'm going to introduce these to you. We're going to start in the initiating process group this evening, and by the time the course is over, we'll finish in the closed process group. And I will show you all 47 processes, when and where they would have been applied. Okay, so but the idea here is foundational understanding. So I want to show you the real quick again, show you the three levels of the methodology that we're going to show you in this course. The top level are the 5 process groups. Within the 5 process groups are 10 knowledge areas. As you take a look at the list here, if this is the first time you've seen these, Jill, but um, other than integration management, the other 9, as you can see, are big, I want to say, areas of influence, areas of impact, things that can truly impact your project to the point of success or failure. Any one of these. Now, I'm very proud of, my profession as a project manager. I've been a project manager now almost 40 years now. So when I first started out, it was only scope, time, and cost. That was it. Today, we're taking a lot more into consideration. Projects failed for a lot of other reasons than bad scheduling or bad budgeting. All right, it did because of a lot of other things. It's particularly when we get into risk and human resources and things like that. There's places where you can really fall down. And I'm glad that my profession takes this into account these days. Anyway, we are, as we apply the 47 processes, those 47 processes reside within these 10 knowledge areas. The 10th one, the first one, integration management, it exists to facilitate the others, communication between the others. Okay, explain that when we get there this evening. Like I just said, within the 10 knowledge areas, there lies the 47 processes of PMBOK. Now, not all 47 processes are applicable to every single project, Joe. You'll pick and choose the processes that apply to your project. It's going to be most of them, but some of them you're not going to use. An example would be, you look at procurement management here, the next to last one here. This is how we manage our vendors and our contracts and the work that they're performing for us in the field, assuming that we're doing a project completely in-house, right? Completely in-house with resources, materials, tools, everything. I wouldn't even use an entire knowledge area. So that's what I mean about the methodology itself is flexible. All right, it's flexible in the regard that you can pick and choose these. These processes are, they don't even call them best practices. They call them good practices, because if you try to read PMBOK itself, it's simply a generic reference. It doesn't ever make any reference to any project as an example to try to strengthen any of its points or anything like that. So this is the methodology on one page right here. It's the 3 levels. The top line being the process groups, second level being the knowledge areas, the third level being the processes themselves. We like hierarchies in project management, by the way, Joe. We like stuff like hierarchies and breakdown structures and anything that puts fences around things. We love as project managers, because really a project starts and ends. And that's what makes it a project. Otherwise, it's ongoing operations. We're in charge of making sure that project finally does end and end successfully. So we're always looking to try to get our arms around things and try to quantify and establish the line in the sand, and then whatever metaphor works for you. But that's what we try to do as project managers. So a lot of times I'm going to say to you, think like a project manager. And when I say that to you, it's not only because I want to show you the process, but I want you to think that, how can I use this process to my benefit, not just to pass an exam, but also to be a better project manager when I get back to work. Okay, the 47 processes, I wanted to show you that here's where they reside. If you look at the 5 process groups, now again, Jill, you didn't see the first video, so I want to kind of touch on a couple of things here. Take a look at the first and the last process groups, initiating and closing. They are indeed much like a starting line and a finish line. So what we're going to try to do with those 2 powerful processes in the initiating group and the 2 powerful processes in the close group is to establish a starting line and a finish line. Particularly in the beginning, we want to set a definite where we know where we're going. The better that we can do that in the beginning of a project, and I know this makes sense to you, the more we can define the mission, the better we can plan it, the better that we can budget for it, all right? Because we know where we're going and exactly what's expected of us. So we're going to do a lot of that early this evening, and I'm going to talk a lot about that. That's why that initiation process group exists in the first place. It is our good starting line. Okay. So you can see only 2 processes of the 47 belong in the first process group and 2 in the last. That means the other 43 processes are here in the middle. And this is what, in my class, I affectionately call it the sausage factory, right? Just like Congress, right? This is where you make the sausage. This is where the legislation gets made right here, is in the 3 middle process groups. And I don't think I have the graphic here, but it's not a linear process. Between, doesn't go initiation to planning, to execution, to monitor, to close. There's a lot of interaction right here. There's a lot of feedback going on. As we're planning, we're getting a lot of feedback loops to make our plan nice and solid. Once it's solid, then we take it into execution, and we're going to monitor its performance and get even more feedback. How well are we doing now that we're executing? I'll explain all of that as we do this. But that's the sausage factory, and that's where the other 43 processes exist. 24 of them are in the planning process group, Joe. 24 of them. So that's fully half the methodology is in the planning process group. Makes a lot of sense. But it's what we do as project managers. Once we have crafted a well-crafted an executable schedule and budget, then it's our people skills. Really will keep things moving along from that point on. But it's diving in, getting sufficient detail about the scope of our project, the expectations of our stakeholders, and putting it into a workable plan and making it happen. Okay, we're going to spend a whole lot of time in the planning process group. The execution process group is pretty cut and dry. It's pretty clean. There's only 8 processes in the execution. This is where we're going to be issuing the work authorizations and things like that, making the work happen that we schedule. So the flow of work here, and we only need 8 processes, but they're pretty powerful. And then while those processes are being, in other words, the work is being executed across the timeline, we're going to monitor its performance. And so we're going to use these monitor and control processes to measure against the baselines that we established in planning. How well are we doing versus plan is what we're going to do based in scope and time and cost and quality. We have a control process for all of those. That whereas as the work is being performed, we're going to measure against it to see if we're keeping the plan. If we're not, we're going to feedback that we need to create some kind of change. So we have feedbacks in planning, we're going to call progressive elaboration, and we have feedbacks in execution, we're going to call the CAPAs, right? The corrective and preventive actions. Okay, so let's dive right in. All right, Jill, if you're ready, and everyone else, the initiating process group. So welcome to the methodology. So like I said, the first lecture, what we did is we went over some of the fundamentals. I'm going to refer back to them where it's appropriate, but we're going to jump right in and talk about the initiating process group and what does that mean. Just like I said a couple minutes ago, I want to establish the starting line, because if I know the starting line, meaning the requirements, I want to know before we go too deep into planning as much as I can about the deliverable that's expected. That means I can set a solid finish line. That means I can start, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I set requirements, and you understand probably more than any of my students do, Jill, that with using SMART principles, right? That things are measurable and attainable, and we'll go over that in a few minutes. The reason I want to do that as early as possible is I want to establish the finish line. I establish, here's your requirement, and here's what satisfies the requirement. So there's the start line, there's the finish line. In my course, that's I can't be any more regular guy, plain English than that. The sooner that we can establish the requirement and what satisfies that requirement, the better. The better that we can get our arms around the project and begin to make some sense, bring some reality to our project, okay? I want you to think in terms of a funnel. Like I said in my ad, I like to use regular everyday kind of examples. The funnel, and I know again that most of you know what I mean. At the beginning of a project, it's the top of the funnel, right? All the requirements. It's almost a wish list of things, what we want to do. Sometimes the top of this funnel is so wide, it's ridiculous. The project is, I don't know, let's world peace project or something. It's unattainable. First off, I will tell you, projects should be quick hit commando type things. They should be uh, they're created they're created for a particular deliverable. So they should last as long as they need to create the deliverable necessary for it. They're not things that we should live on. I don't want to retire on projects. I don't want to have projects that go on forever that are really not projects. The best thing that you can do, even large, huge projects, is take even phased approaches. The longer that a project is scheduled out, and this makes sense, right? For any kind of projection, I try to my 1 year plan is going to be much more accurate than a 5 year plan is going to be, because it's tough to plan 5 years into the future. The same thing with projects. I want to try to make a project to where it's actually doable. So I think in terms of funneling down all these requirements and funneling down to the ones that are really going to get into the project and become part of the scope. This is part of the thinking that I'm talking about, that regular guy thinking of 40 years as a project manager, that right from day one, I want to try to get my arms around what exactly am I going to be doing with this project. And I want to start right here in the initiating process group. So that funnel is the metaphor I may go back to. I'm sorry, the analogy I may go back to several times. All right, during this, I want you to take a lot of things and try to funnel them down into what exactly is going to get in, and as well defined as possible. Right. So even the things that make it in have the correct fences around them. What I showed you here is the initiating process group. And if I can, Joe, I'm going to jump out for just 1 second here, and I want to go out to the Vargas drawing. This is that drawing that I sent you before we started the class, and I really like this a lot, and I want to jump out and show you where we're going this evening with this. This drawing is a very well done drawing of the 47 processes and where they reside within the 5 process groups and kind of the interaction of them. There's so much interaction going on. It's kind of tough not to draw a lot of lines that might cross themselves, but I think Vargas did a pretty good job here. So where we're going tonight is, here's the initiating process group up here. As you can see, there's only 2 processes, but they're quite powerful. From the initiating process group, we're going to go right down into planning. We're going to go right into planning right here, and let me get a little bit bigger here. We're going to go right into planning, and I'm going to show you, maybe I got a little too big here.
Oh. Yeah, that's much better. I printed out an 8 by 11. I can't really see my copy thing.
Yeah, good. But now I'm so big now that I'm scrolling all over the place now. Hold on a second here. I'm looking for 4.2. There. Develop charter, quality plan. Right below here. Right below here. Yeah, we'll go right into here. So, I'm sorry, the integration. See, look how that gets so big. Anyway, let me make this a little smaller here. 75 will probably work. Where we're going in the drawing. Okay, from the initiating process group, we're going down into planning. And planning, as you can see, has scope, has time, has costs, quality. So these are all those subsidiary plans. And this is the big kahuna of all those subsidiary plans. Jill, I wanted to show you, it's the central plan. The project management plan. It's almost subsidiary plan town hall. We're going to get that, at least that far. I'm going to show you that, and we're going to start to plan out some of the scope and time this evening, okay? But that's where we're going with this, and I really like this drawing here because, again, it's clean. It's really clean, it's pleasing to the eye, and it does answer a lot of questions. When we get to 4.2, take a look at all the ins and outs coming out of this area here. So I thought it was well done, and we're going to refer to it several times. So let's get back to the PowerPoint. Okay, here's those two processes of the initiation process group. As you can see, it's just two. It's developing 4.1, which is develop project charter, and 13.1, identify stakeholders. Two very key actions for us to even start our project. Good methodologies, Joe, and I know you agree with me. Charter their projects. You know, when I was a puppy, the hammerhead bosses I worked for, particularly in construction, didn't see any value in chartering the projects. They thought it was wasted time. It's unbillable time, Clark. I can't bill this. I can't. What good is it to me? What good is it is because it keeps the project on focus. It's so many, especially in high capital budget projects. Even small little mistakes can be very, very costly. A great thing to do is start with that solid starting line like I talked about, because then you have traceability. Then you have true traceability back to the very beginning. What drove requirements? What drove this project in the first place? Okay, and what was committed to by the organization. Project charters do all that too. They give a project oomph, right? It gives it commitments. The organization gets behind it and says, I will fund it, I will resource it, I will support it. Okay? So let's jump right in. Here's where we're going right now. We're going to start in the initiation process group. Congratulations. I'm going to show you the first two processes of the 47. First one is going to be 4.1, but it's part of integration management. Now, I said that I do not teach per knowledge area like the book does, chapter by chapter, but I have to show it to you. So at a screen like this, before I jump into each individual process, I'll stop and show you the knowledge areas. And they kind of make sense. If you look at the flow from 4.1 through 4.6, kind of makes sense that would be the processes of integration management. That if you notice, integration management is not really a knowledge area in and of itself. It facilitates the sharing of knowledge between the other 9 knowledge areas. It's almost a highway for information. It's almost control, stop signs, and measuring. It does a lot of that here because it forces you to process the data going forward and feedbacks coming back in a way that can be used by the other beginning processes correctly. Note something about integration management. It is the only of the knowledge areas that has at least one process in all 5 of the process groups. That makes sense, right? Because it's integration management. It needs to be represented in each one of the process groups. But again, it acts almost as the captain of these process groups. That whatever goes on within those process groups has to get past the gatekeeper, which is that process within that process group for integration management. 4.1 is no different. So I'm going to show you 4.1 first. The other one I'm going to show you is stakeholder management. 13.1, okay, that's the 2 process, and you'll see in stakeholder management has 4 processes, all right, and they also make sense, and I will show you those as they apply. So when we get into planning, I'll show you 13.2. When we get into execution, I'll show you 13.3 and so forth, all right, where they apply and when I would apply them. But here in stakeholder management, what is stakeholder management all about? It's managing those relationships. So it makes sense that the first thing I want to do is identify all my players. And that's what we're going to do in the initiation process group, Jill. We're going to identify who our players are. Our big players all the way down to our little players. A stakeholder is anyone who is either affected by or has an influence on our project. So that goes all the way up to upper management within our own company, our outside clients that are paying for the project, vendors that are working on our project, all the way down to the end user folks that are actually going to use whatever the deliverable that is. I need their input, okay? They are stakeholders as well. So I want to identify them all. I want to identify their initial requirements. So when I start to talk to my stakeholders in 13.1, I want to know who they are. I want to know what their roles in the project are going to be. I want to know what their initial requirements are, and maybe some of their initial expectations. Are they for the project and against? We'll talk about that in a few minutes here. Those two processes there, actually committing a project to committing our organization to supporting a project and identifying those stakeholders is a great way to start our project. So let's jump right in. What is a project charter? Okay. Well, you see the guy on the right. Now, Jill, you're from Princeton, right? You're not. This is, I guess you, yeah, I guess you guys have these guys downtown where the town crier types. But in Philly, of course, they're all over Old City, right? These guys that ran Independence Hall and all the famous areas down there. And so I thought I'd use a picture of this guy because I thought it was a really good analogy, a regular guy example of what a charter is. And what it is, it's really a proclamation. It's like, hear ye, okay? This project is underway, all right? That, this hear ye. No more toy makers to the king, whatever proclamation. But this is what a project charter does, okay? And specifically, it authorizes the existence of the project. So the project is formally chartered and recognized. That means for resources and funding and staffing and commitment for reserves later, things like that. I'm going to show you the elements of a project charter. But think about projects, and I've done so many of them early in my career that were not chartered. Sometimes the problem with this is you get into the meat and potatoes of the project, get into execution, and now you're hitting the speed bumps. And people say, I didn't say that, I didn't mean that. You got to make sure that you eliminate as many of those bad things that could happen, the vagueness, I want to call it, later on, because people will use them. You're the project manager. So again, the more that you set things in the beginning, that in a project charter, there's actually sign-offs here. There's actually going to be, I'm going to actually ask my project sponsor to sign off on what they committed to, right? Something I can show them later. Now, I can't yell at my boss, for example, but I can certainly show them a signed charter they signed 3 months ago that said you were going to commit to this. Now, you either are or you're not, kind of thing. But it really is a good start, and it really kind of, it sets the pace for an organization, okay? So it formally commitments from management. It also defines the elements of the project. So the importance of getting the statement of work and some of the milestones, risks. At this point, we're still in the 30,000 foot level. Maybe not so that high up. Maybe we're only at 15,000 feet now because we're actually chartering our project. That means we've created a statement of work. We probably already have a contract in place. So we do have our arms somewhat around what we're going to do, but we have some more work to do as project managers before we're going to turn this into a schedule and budget. But at this point, we're going to take some of the inputs that we do have, like a statement of work and milestones, risks and assumptions in line. We're going to list those. We're going to make sure that they're called out on the project charter. Remember, the project charter is basically telling you where you start from. Think about the project manager that jumps into a project 6 months from now that wasn't the one that started the project. I have a document from all the way back from the beginning. So if I have to teach myself history of this project, this is a good document to look at. Here's where we assign our project manager. And for the exam, you want to think of yourself as the project manager that's been managing the project all the way from the beginning, unless they specify different in the question. When we get to 9 and 10, the last couple of sessions, we're going to be doing mock exam questions. And it's not just so that we can bone up on the material itself and the application of material, but how to read these questions. Sometimes these questions are filled with information that have nothing to do with the answer. All right. It's extrapolating the right information and answering the right question asked. We're going to talk about that in the end. But again, part of this is that they assume that you are the project manager from the beginning of the project. This has been your baby since charter. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the elements of a project charter. I took this screenshot right out of PMBOK, but this is a pretty good screenshot, and this is a really good list of some of the things that we as project managers want to see happen on our project charter. We want them at least called out. Now, even small organizations, folks, can do a charter even rudimentary. Some organizations have never done any kind of professional project management. You've just done stuff. and hopefully it turned out okay. If you really want to do things and you want to start out, but you don't want to start out so complex that you're going to lose everybody, then just do it the best that you can. Start your charter with some of these elements here, and you can figure it out. And the next thing you know, you're a professional project manager. Some of these things on here are really good to know up front. I also say that this is a good time in the project for us project managers to infuse what I call the dose of reality into the project. Right now, we're still at a wannabe wish list. The euphoria is very high, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to make sure people are going into a project with their eyes open here. I want to have them get an idea that you do realize this is going to be about a 2-year project, right? This is going to cost about 2.7, even in an order of magnitude, 2.7 million. You have, even at this point, I can kind of give you an idea that this is a long project, an expensive project. I want to kind of infuse those things into my early discussions. So I want people to have a reality. Maybe we don't need to invent a spaceship, okay? Maybe we'll be fine with a rocket car or instead of a full-blown spaceship, because we can get it done in 6 months and it still satisfies requirements. That's what I'm talking about trying to make things to a project that's actually going to be successful, that can actually be measured, that can actually be scheduled. All of these things, once we accept responsibility, we're responsible for it. So I'm telling you, we need to get down to a granular level sooner or later. The sooner the better. Might as well start with good practices of funneling right now, okay? Take a look at this list and kind of know the key points for the exam. Okay. So moving forward, let's look at the actual process itself. 4.1, and here's, Jill, I know you missed the first, but this is how I introduce, this is how I show you each of the processes. This is the graphic that I'm going to use. Input, tools and techniques, output, just like every good methodology, just like SIPOC is, where this is the IPO of the SIPOC, right? This is this is how I'm going to show you inputs, tools, outputs. Okay. For the project charter, inputs include the statement of work, the business case, agreements, which are the contracts and such, EEFs and OPAs that I didn't go over with you yet, so I am going to give quickly for you, Jill, what they are. Tools and techniques are expert judgment, facilitation techniques. As you can see, there's no rocket science here in tools and techniques. There's no, slide stuff I need a slide rule for right here, right? You're going to see this time and time again as we dive, especially as we're diving into the planning processes, that the tools and techniques are not complex slide rule stuff. Most of it is human interaction. Most of it is human interaction. Techniques to draw out requirements or data or information from humans so other humans can use it, okay? So facilitation techniques and experts who can help you define scope and define your estimates. Your output, you have a single output from this particular process, and that's the project charter itself. So before I leave this screen for your benefit, and I guess for everyone's benefit, I might as well go over particularly inputs one more time. The statement of work for the exam, you need to know this, that a statement of work is a customer generated or a client generated document, okay? You're going to see this again later when we get to procurement management. When we're putting out RFPs, we're going to be the customer creating a statement of work for vendors, outside vendors to bid on. That's what we're kind of doing here. We're the vendor that's taking a client's statement of work. This is their understanding, their interpretation of what they want. We're going to tie it to a business case, particularly in the case of that we're doing something within our own organization. Projects exist for a reason, right? And there should be a direct alignment from the deliverable of our project all the way back to some top line organizational objective. So all the way back through project governance, PMO programs, all the way back up through portfolios. The project existed for some reason, okay? Either for a client that's paying us, or to satisfy some top line objective that was decided by the executives early. The agreement. So if in the case of of our clients, we're going to have a contract. Salesman sold a deal. And we have to comply to that contract. That's an input to the charter. All right. Now, when it comes to EEFs and OPAs, Joe, I'm going to say you're going to need to really look at that first video and look at what I mean. But let's quickly talk about what that means. EEFs are the environment. Both of these EEFs and OPAs have to do with the organization that you're in. So in other words, we're not doing a project in a vacuum. We're doing a project because you work at J&J, and inside of J&J, they have rules and procedures and forms and processes and databases and culture and all kinds of things you have to take into account as you plan your project within your organization. That's what EEFs and OPAs are. EEFs more enterprise environment, like the culture or the geographic dispersion of your teams and things like that are environmental factors. OPAs are what they sound like, process assets. So what are the things that your organization has at its disposal that you can use, like databases, like applications, like things like that, that empower you, okay, within your organization. And that changes from organization to organization. I just want you to know what they are that you have to take into account where you are as you do your project as much as anything else, okay? Enough said. We'll talk about more about that a little further in the planning process. But here we're creating our project charter. And remember what I just showed you when I jumped down? Let me jump back out again to the Vargas drawing one quickly to go back up to the top here. Notice that the way Vargas draws the diagram here is that it looks like these two interact. They kind of feed off each other, don't they? And they kind of do. I cannot really come up with all those requirements and all those elements of the project charter unless I've had my at least initial meetings with my stakeholders, identified my stakeholders, know what my top line requirements are. So they do feed off each other, all right, here in the initiating process group. And it makes a lot of sense. My stakeholders are really the ones that I'm doing my project for. So I kind of have a theory that I actually have two projects going on at any given time. The project itself, where I'm actually applying project management processes to create a deliverable. But at the same time, I also have a stakeholder project going on. Those relationships from my stakeholders, starting with the initiating all the way through close, making sure that their requirements are met, their issues are resolved, their conflicts are resolved, their expectations are set and reset, that kind of thing, and all the way through. If the stakeholder project doesn't go well, then neither will the project. That's just so enough said. That's why I say I want to go back out and show you that they do feed from each other. Okay, so I showed you, I'm sorry for the white screen, but I had really no choice because I wanted to show you two examples here of what a project charter could look like, okay? And by the way, this is the first major document that keeps you within the methodology. I think the documentation especially the documentation that's compelled, this is compelled. You have to do a charter. It keeps you on the straight and narrow. It makes you use the methodology, right? That you don't stray from the formula of success. PMBOK works if you apply it correctly and you apply it with experience and some knowledge and such, but it works. So use it. And again, part of what keeps a young organization on that path, especially if it's the first time you're going through it, is that the documentation kind of makes you stay on path. Here's an example of what I mean from the project charters. If you don't have them, there's so many templates out there. There are so many of them out there. The one on the left, you can download from PMI for free. I mean, all the templates, every document that you might need within the methodology is for free on PMI if you're a member. Nice and bland though looking. It's pretty bland and generic looking is the project charter, okay? Here, but it's very functional. The one on the right, I borrowed from one of my customers. Henkels and McCoy does like this. And as you can see, they're pretty far down the road. They're more of a very sophisticated project management group, and they would be, wouldn't they? Because they're big construction. So all they really do is project work. That's really the part and parcel of their operation. So they've really refined. Their documents are customized for them. Okay, so they're very catching to the eye. They mean quite a bit to the team. Uh, Even the way that they formatted their forms. Because think about this: as we're doing a project, we're also collecting a whole lot of data. We're generating and collecting a whole lot of data that we can use either now on the project we're doing or for later projects. And so the way that we collect also helps us. So the way you design forms. But I'm telling you here, chart your projects, okay, know the elements of for the exam, okay, but I'm showing you that it's not a daunting task. Because if you want to start something like this in your company, you can get a whole set of templates for nothing and then kind of customize them as you go along, particularly if you're the one that started this. Okay, let's look at the other process in the initiating process group, and that was the identify stakeholders, and it really is a big one here. Again, I don't mean to fly through these, but I think that as you can see how important it is to set that starting line. Here's the requirement, and here's what satisfies that requirement. So the start line and the finish line. Stakeholders are going to help us do that. The stakeholders are going to tell us what their starting expectations are and what they expect to see from a deliverable at the end. So let's talk about the stakeholder, the 13.1 from a process standpoint, from what you know for the exam. Inputs project charter. One of my pet peeves is that an input to the project charter should be identify stakeholders, don't you think? It's not. And don't do that for the exam. Don't listen to me. I'm just saying that if they feed off each other, you think they'd be inputs to each other, but officially they're not. So for the exam, 13.1, the project charter is an input to identify stakeholders. I want you to know where we're going with each one of these processes. I think is a good thing to know. Okay. Procurement documents. What does that mean? That some of our stakeholders or some of the things we may want to do are going to be with outside of the company. Like you do, Joe, you bring on a lot of manufacturers. Okay. So there's going to be procurement documents, not just agreements, but plans and specifications and all those kind of things. They're going to be inputs to your identifying your stakeholders. Okay. And those dreaded EEFs and OPAs that I think you should bone up on because they're so important. All right. But here's where we're going with this. Again, right into stakeholder. We're going to tools and techniques, stakeholder analysis, where we're not talking about anything that NASA would do. We're talking about interviewing our stakeholders and trying to figure out where they stand. Some of the fancier stuff we might want to do is know their level of interest, their level of authority, and their level of influence on a project at different points in the project. But it's for the exam, the exam's not going to ask you to really name a whole lot of these analysis techniques. You just have to know they exist. I'm telling you, I like the quality ones, Joe, the ones that you guys use in quality. Here's where I might start to use House of Quality here while I'm talking to my stakeholders, where I'm trying to really prioritize their requirements and then map those requirements against my organization's capabilities to actually satisfy them. It's so much more of a superior tool. But stakeholder analysis against expert judgment. And I'm going to talk in length about what I think about expert judgment. Take it with a grain of salt, but it's really good advice from a 40-year veteran. Understand that the experts are subject matter experts is what they mean here for the exam. And then, of course, endless meetings. Endless meetings. I'm meeting with my stakeholders over and over again. That doesn't mean just face-to-face. A lot of times we're going to be trying to build consensus here, Jill. So we're going to be doing rounds of emails with surveys in it. And we're going to weight those surveys. And you know what I mean by that. We're going to weight those surveys until we come up with the top 2 choices or something. Because really the way that we get our arms around to how do we satisfy the requirement to really set the finish line. So we need to set metrics for success, right? So we're going to establish our KPIs, what are our key performance indicators, what do we need to do, and how are we going to satisfy them? So something that can be measured, all right? Endless meetings. Our output is a stakeholder register, and that stakeholder register is much like this, okay? Just an Excel spreadsheet listing and it's a living document, by the way. It's a living, breathing document that's going to change and grow all the way through the project. Anything that's human-based, anything that's human-based will be what I call a living document. And when I'm talking about baselines, when we get into those 11 monitor and control processes, only three really have measurable baselines. The others are living baselines. And I'll explain what I mean by that. They're quality, human resources, stakeholders. Even though they're human-based, there's still a way that we can put a line in the sand and measure against it and say how well we're doing in those areas. I'll show you that later. But here, this is what we're creating to start with. We started with our project charter with all those elements on it, kind of really getting our arms around our top level requirements for our project, and then identifying our players. And we want to know some of the attributes about our stakeholders here. So we want to know, again, who they are, what their role in the project is, what their influence level is, whether they're a positive or negative stakeholder. We may want to have to try to bring them along. They may be maybe somebody that's going to that doesn't want this project to happen in the first place. And that could be for a lot of reasons. And that's where our people skills come in. Know for the exam that we create a stakeholder register right in the net, and this document is going to live and breathe all the way through the project. Okay. So when we talk about here for the exam, I think it's important to understand, and for good project management, I think it's good to understand, what are we doing here in the initiating process group? Well, yeah, Clark, we're setting a good starting line, and we're setting that's the finish line, the metrics we're starting to get some kind of idea. How do we satisfy those requirements? So if we're smart, we're going to identify deliverables more early in the process than we have before. So even in the exam, still as we're using PMBOK 5, but in January, they added a couple of questions to the exam right to this point I'm making now, where they say that in the stakeholder analysis, in those early stakeholder meetings, you want to try to get down to identifying deliverables, not just requirements, but to see if you can get your arms around that end deliverables sooner in the process. Like I said to you, it almost infuses a level of reality that into the early process, that you guys do realize this is a year-long process, and this is going to cost those kinds of things. To start to get your arms around the deliverables, and people come in with open eyes. If they like what they see, then they're committing to it and they're moving forward. But everyone's moving forward with open eyes and full understanding. And I think this is a really good thing to do, is to try to identify those deliverables early. So I want to introduce the principle of the SMART principle here. And anybody that's been to even high school, but let alone any business class, or understands what I mean by these SMART principles, that as I try to identify requirements, I'm doing so keeping these 5 principles in mind. That is, identify a requirement that it's specific, that it's measurable, that it's attainable, that it's realistic, that it's timely. Because that's my finish line. That's how I'm going to prove that I actually finished, that I actually satisfied that requirement. Here, sign here, Mr. Customer. Okay. And I know you understand what I mean. If there's no arguments, if the meter had to read 98, and it does, it reads 98. I don't care how difficult that customer is. You have met the requirement, and there's very little that they can argue about. It's true. So let's talk about what that means when it's the voice of the customer. And Jill, maybe more than any of my students here understand exactly what I mean by infusing voice of the customer in early. All right, that they're trying to get down to the true requirements and making those requirements and identifying them with these SMART principles in mind, particularly the M, that I need to be able to measure it so I know that I can make it. Okay, this guy with the megaphone is not just my voice of my customer; it's the voice of my project manager as well. That I'm making sure that I'm infusing that level of reality. That I'm keeping everything on a professional line. That we're starting with a good starting line, because we did this professionally. We got our arms around things as early as we can. When you're doing this, I want you to remember that we're not just doing we're looking at all requirements early. So, and again, we're going to progressively elaborate. So we're still at the 15,000 foot level here yet, but we're going to identify the business requirements, the stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, project requirements, transition requirements, right? We put an application in implemented in a location, and once we leave, the service folks will take over now. What's the requirements of that? The SLAs and all those kinds of things. Any assumptions and dependencies, and of course, the constraints of our project, okay? Well, these are the things that if we get our arms around early, or at least we're cognizant of, we're going to be much, much more successful. Okay, our team is going to be much more coherent, much more cohesive, right? Much more informed because we're starting out that way. Traceability. I want to go back to say that the project charter and the things that we're doing here early before we even jump into planning gives us a level of traceability. Big time. And I know you understand it when we talk about quality principles. It takes us all the way back to the original requirement. And what drove that original requirement? What was it that, why did we want this? You know, maybe the project's starting to morph into something else now 2 years later. This traceability allows us to go all the way back to the original requirement. So as we progress through the methodology, we want to keep this in mind, that we're really trying to drive almost a straight line from the starting line initiation to the finish line in as much of a straight line as we can at the close process with a traceability back. Okay, it really gives us a lot of power. That's what we're looking for. Why do we do SMART? So that we have a finish line, something that we can point to and say we are done. And I'm not doing this to be a hard ass. I'm doing this to be a professional. That if it's open-ended, this project will never end. And what metaphor? Okay, it's the ball. We're on the 5-yard line, Clark. We're almost in. No, you're not. You've been on the 5-yard line now for the last 25 carries. All right, you're not moving it in any closer. That's because you really don't have a defined finish line, do you? That there's a lot of vagueness and there's still a lot of issues, isn't there? That should have been identified or at least planned for much, much earlier than now. Okay. I'm not going to go over all of these here because really they're not required for you to know them in depth for the PMP exam. And besides that, Jill and I know Aubrey and a couple other have seen all these. You use these in your work all the time. These are the tools that, if I want to say what do they do? These are about communications. These are about getting people to talk to you, to tell you what they really want, and to try to do it in a way that drives them to the true requirements, the true needs, the true measure of success. When we get to risk, we're going to have to try to figure out what risk tolerance is. And right off the bat, you can think, well, that sounds pretty nebulous, Clark. There could be a lot of room there. That's right, there is. So we're going to have to try to get everybody on the same page. And we do that using many of these type of techniques. Some of them we're talking to people individually. Some of them we're talking to them collectively, trying to get consensus. But we're using this tool to try to drive top level requirements into scope, true solid project requirements, all right? And to continue to manage our stakeholder relationships all the way through, okay? These are the tools and techniques. So when I talk about facilitation techniques, these are what I'm talking about. I may refer back to them every now and then, but I'm not going to touch on these all together. You know the list, all right? It's here. It's in PMBOK. I left it on the screen long enough now that you can hit the pause button and look at it from the video. But this is the list of facilitation techniques that we're going to refer back to time and time again. You can see that we'll use them plenty in planning, right? All right, the stakeholder analysis. One that they might actually ask you about on the test is this little matrix here, that you have a matrix and either axis can be anything that have to do with what the power versus interest, or level of authority versus active involvement, however I want to try to figure out and really hone in on the personality on the propensities of my individual stakeholders. Getting a little fancy here, right? What I really want to know is what can they do? What will they do? When do they need it done? Those kinds of things. Start with the must-haves. That's my best advice to you because all of these documents are living documents. I'm going to show you the same things. We're building activity lists and all kinds of things that they're going to continue to grow. Start with the must-haves and then grow from there. Okay. So they might show you. So you'll have a matrix like this, and we like matrices like this in project management. It helps us to hone down in and get consensus, right? I can weight my criteria. You've seen so many of these matrices, you could probably get sick looking at them. Okay. But the other one was the salience model, the overlapping circles thing, okay? There might be a softball question of the 200. There might be one about a salience model, and that's what this is, okay? They're overlapping or common areas between the concepts. Okay. For those that say, well, how do I get started, Clark? What's a good start? You start with a brainstorming, okay? We're getting close. So in about 10 minutes, we're going to take a break here, Jill. Well, but we start with a brainstorming, and you've seen this, the affinity diagram. So a good way to start is to just start brainstorming. You have a bunch of folks in a room, and they're shouting out ideas, and you're just writing them down on a whiteboard, right? So I'm doing this from a regular guy standpoint, maybe not just for you, Jill, but for everybody else. After I get a whole bunch of good ideas up there, what do? I start to group them together. We're going to do this. This is project management when we do risks, when we do resources, when we're going to do this similar type of thing over and over again. We're going to try to identify things at the top, and we're going to try to group them and prioritize them and break them down all the way down so we don't miss anything. Okay. The affinity diagram really is much like a breakdown structure right from the beginning. It helps us here. We're going to use it to try to make sure that we collect all the requirements necessary. And then later we're going to prioritize them. But we collected them and we've grouped them. So what do? You collect them and you categorize. That's what we've done here. And from there, now we can further break them down to find out within each of the categories which requirements are going to live and be part of this project and which ones aren't. Okay. That's where we're going next. Historical data is a great way to go. And that's where this is the first time we've ever done this project. Then it's been done before. So again, I want you to lean on that if you've done this before, if your organization's done this before, then much of this upfront work, much of the templates, much of the data, much of the metrics may have already been done already. They may already, and you can just incorporate them into your project, which shortens your planning cycle down. Don't shoot from the hip now. You always want to use data that's credible. That's really the key. And one of the keys to credible data is that I see the same answer from 2 or 3 different sources. That kind of tells me that I'm on the right track. I'll get a little further into that down as we move into planning. But that's one of my keys is I like to try to see the same answer from 2 or 3 different places. It makes me sleep better at night. Okay. When I'm doing my interviewing, when I'm beginning to collect all my requirements, when I'm first talking to my stakeholders, when I interview with all 10 knowledge areas in mind. So don't forget quality when you're talking to them. Ask them. I know they want their functionality. They want whatever toy or whatever. I don't mean to be sassy here. I'm not. I'm just saying whatever it is that they see. Each stakeholder might see the deliverable through their own eyes, right? So they have their own agenda and their own thoughts. Okay, you want to interview them in a 360-degree view, not just how it affects them individually, but also collectively. And then I want to ask them how they see quality affecting, how they see a resource effect or risks. What risks do you see from your user standpoint or your sponsor standpoint? I want them to start talking to me about the other knowledge areas as well, because I'm doing all of this all at once. Am I not? I am. Okay. Slice of the real world when it comes to stakeholders is this, all right, that there are 4 really key documents that are living documents through the course of the project here. The stakeholder register I just showed you, but the others, they make sense. There's a risk register. We're going to build that when we get into risks, when we get into risk management, and pretty much just what I showed you. We're going to identify risks, categorize them, prioritize them, and we're going to build a risk register that's going to be a living, breathing document. We're going to add risks. We're going to change their risk levels. change logs, of course, changes coming back that are proposed through, and then issues that have come up. I have known that over my 40 years that within these 4 documents, there's a lot of overlap, okay? There's a lot of overlap, that the same issue could be manifested or explained in different ways. In other words, I'm seeing it in 4 different documents, or I'm seeing it begin in 4 different documents. If I start to look at this, I'm getting a view of my stakeholders and how to manage them from 4 different perspectives. I'm almost proactive here. I'm staying ahead of them. I know what their changes are. I know what their issues are. I know what their expectations are. I know what their risk levels are. I know what their requirements are. So as I monitor these 4 documents, really, these 4 documents here tell me a lot about my stakeholders and how that overriding project that I just spoke about is going. All right, how well are my stakeholders? Sometimes my stakeholder, the stakeholder that's quiet, that doesn't speak at all, is the problem one. Is going to be my problem later. Maybe I ought to reach out to that stakeholder and have a little conversation, a little temperature check. Hey, I know you've been quiet. Does that mean you're okay, or does that mean you're mad and mean and okay? But here, I'm saying managing these, I'm seeing little things happening within these 4 documents that affect my stakeholders and that affect each other. There's a lot of interaction, a lot of overlay. This is a good way to manage your stakeholders. And I show you the timeline underneath because, again, these are living documents. So they change all the time. So that circumstances, I think the circumstances on the ground, okay, change. You need to say, if you're a good project manager, you have your thumb on the pulse of your project every single day. Okay, that is the initiating process group. And I'm going to stop there because we're going into planning next. And we're going to go a little bit into planning and stop. We'll do about an hour. Before I break, Jill, I know you're the only one on tonight, but did you have any questions?
So, no, I don't really have any questions, but I was just thinking about, walking through a project, and I think all these things are really important. One thing I was wondering about is the importance of identifying a sponsor, because we don't seem to do that unless it's a really big project.
Yep, that's exactly right. When I didn't show you that here yet because I was going to show you that in stakeholder management as I put my plan together. But you're exactly right. When I identify my stakeholders, I'm identifying their roles. So I need a sponsor. In fact, I need a sponsor to sign off on my project charter, and I want that sponsor to be engaged, involved. So I'm going to give them. You know what you could do, Joe? You can almost train your boss in a lot of ways. So the project charter is a good way. I've made you commit to some things already. So I don't want to say I'm telling you what to do,
right?
But you understand what I mean? I'm putting controls in place that even he has to abide by. So it's almost like I'm the boss. Yeah. See what I mean?
Right.
And you're
because a lot of times you're not just looking for money from them; you're looking for them to help you drive it too.
Exactly, and I need them.
Yeah.
I need them to let's say that I need to make a phone call for me, even something like that could be very important. I need them to get the client to back off a little bit or something, or give me a little bit more time, or grant me a meeting or something. I need them to get involved. Another one is the reserves. We're going to talk about the reserves that we're going to figure into our project. Okay, that if we need them, that we're talking about the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns of project management. We're going to have reserves put away. Our sponsor is the one that's going to okay whether we can use them or not. I don't want that sponsor on the golf course and disengaged. I want that sponsor involved. I'm going to, and all my team members. I'm going to talk about all that. And the other thing I want to tell you, Jill, is that we go back through this again, by the way. Before we get into mock questions, I'm going to show you this again in a quick review. So I'm going to show you a project chart. We'll review all this again. I need to get through the methodology at least once, so I kind of go through it, and then I come back and look at it a second time in a review, and then we do mock questions. So you will see this again, okay?
Yep.
Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Good. So I'm hoping that everything's making sense, and that my regular guy, plain English, is making sense. I'm going to stop the recording here. The recording. Okay. we're now, I want to say the initiation process group kind of got us, I want to say ankle deep maybe into the methodology. We're gonna wade in a little further now. We're actually going to get into the planning process group, and um, this really is where the meat and potatoes are. I'm probably going to say probably fully half the questions if you think about it. And why wouldn't it be? Half the methodology, is in the planning phases. So we definitely take our time, and you're going to appreciate that. But I do. It's a 10-session course, right? And so I spend 4 sessions, sometimes 5, just in planning. Now the rest of them, they kind of breeze through because once you've seen everything how we planned it, then the other processes kind of really make sense. The monitor, control, and execution processes later that we're going to show you, they really do make sense. They kind of just fall into place. Here is really, for the exam, it's not a memorization, so to speak. To really pass the test, you got to know how to apply it because there's situational questions. They'll say, this is going on and that's going on. What's your next best course of action? So you'll have to look at the 4 answers, and that kind of requires that you know the methodology put to the point where you can apply it. And this is why I teach it like I do, because Aubrey's the other student that comes on, Jill, that would be on the live lectures. She's probably going to join us either Monday or next Thursday again. Um, you know, I guess when you talk about the planning, the planning process, you got to worry about, that you stay focused on getting fences around stuff. So, and let's jump in and I'll show you what I mean. Okay. So here's where we are now in the methodology. So now you see a little method in my madness here is that I showed you. I show you the knowledge area. Again, I'm not teaching you the knowledge area across like the book does, but I'm showing to you on a per process basis. Here in the planning process group now, okay, the one process of integration management is 4.2. That's that develop project management plan. That's that big central overarching plan of our project. This is really the next very important document and a major document in the flow of our methodology. By the way, something I forgot to say about the charter before I get any further, okay? This methodology is iterative, right? There's feedback loops, except for the charter. The charter is, you don't revisit it and revise it, progressively elaborate it. The charter is what it is. Know that for the exam. Because I think there's a softball question of give me a document you don't revise. That's it. The charter, once it's chartered, is it. Now, every other document that you do that I'm going to show you are living documents. They get progressively elaborated, they get affected, and they really don't get retired until the end of the project. But the charter is what it is. So I wanted to show you that. Okay. I'm not going to have to jump out of and get into the Vargas drawing because I already showed this to you. As you can see, 4.2, where I'm going to show you now, the project management plan itself is a pretty important function, right? Because it is the subsidiary plant town hall, the grand central station, all right, of information flow, both in planning and in execution with the campus. Okay, so let's take a good look at what is a project management plan. Now, like I said, Jill, in the first lecture, I talked about project governance, right? So there's, the organization itself, and then below that might be a PMO, for example, okay? So some other level of management. But within, and then that PMO would decide, what methodologies, how do we run our projects within the company, that kind of thing. But within the project itself, you have governance. And this is it here. The project management plan is the project governance within the project and the subsidiary plans. It's going to be the rules of the road for our project, and all of our subsidiary plans are going to be the rules of the road for its particular knowledge area. It's all going to be tied together through integration management. So make sure that data flows and when and where it's supposed to. And so that's really the key of what is a project management plan. It describes how the project will be planned, executed, monitored, and controlled. So it is the overarching plan. This is the rules of the road of how we're going to plan how we're going to execute, monitor, and control our project, okay? We're going to consolidate all the subsidiary plans. So below this overarching plan are going to be 9, well, they're going to be a little bit more than 9. There's going to be, but let me keep it simple. There's going to be a subsidiary plan underneath of the project management plan for each of the knowledge areas. So I'm going to create a plan for scope. How do we handle scope? How do we handle what gets in? How do we handle revisions? How do we measure things? Same thing when we get to time management and cost management. I'm going to make a plan for each one of them of the rules of the road for that knowledge area. How do we handle scope? How do we handle time? And the measurements and all kinds of things. We're going to set those now. These are the rule books that we're going to refer back to as the project is being executed. We're going to refer back to the plan. This is what we said, okay? Project management plan itself is the how. So if you're going to review PMBOK, 4.1, table 4.1 is a pretty good one to take a look at, okay, to understand the project management plan. But like I said, it is, for the exam, this is what you need to know. Generically, what is a project management plan? It's the overarching plan. It is the project governance within the project, okay, and it describes the big picture of the project. Plan, execute, monitor, control. How are you going to do this? It's also the top level of all the other subsidiary plans. So again, how are we going to handle scope and time and cost? They're all plans that reside under the big one, okay? We're going to be progressively elaborating all of these plans. Progressively elaborating. Let me explain what I mean by that term and how that the more we know, when we first start out, this is where we're at, right? And we're coming out of the charter. We have sort of a framework, right? We have a kind of an idea with the tree, what's to look like, but we don't have enough information yet, really, to confidently move forward with a schedule and a budget, right? We need to know more. So we're going to make meeting after meeting, email after email. Every time we learn something new in our planning processes, we're going to be able to fill in our tree a little bit more, okay? And we're going to learn more and more, and we're going to until our tree is of sufficient fullness. What do I mean by that? As we're narrowing down our requirements and coming up with ways to measure them, all right? Once our ranges start to come down into a tolerance, so our ranges for our estimates aren't plus or minus 7 days each side anymore. They're plus or minus 2 days each side. We're starting to really, round after round, the more that we know, the tighter we can make our schedule, our plan, so that when we actually say we're ready to go, we're confident. This is called progressive elaboration. This is the feedback, the iteration of, and really the power within the methodology, and within all methodologies should have feedback loops. New information is learned, revisit the process, and make the process even better. We're in a planning process now, so we can be deliberate. We can sit down meeting after meeting, email after email, report after report, because everything is data. Everything is data and everything is important. And every time we learn something, it's common to all of our plans. So what I'm telling you is we're building all of these plans simultaneously. Don't freak out on me here, Joe, when I tell you that we're building all of our subsidiary plans and our project management plan all at the same time. We're building them together, progressively elaborating them all together. How do we do that? Okay. It's not as daunting a task as you might think. First off, as I've already mentioned, if this project or this type of project has been done before, I'm not going to have to reinvent the wheel all the way from the beginning. Even if I did, it's still not that big. It's still not that daunting a task. And I may want to do it myself if I'm trying to create a new PMO for my own company. I might want to go all the way to start from scratch. But here, my point is that I'm building all my subsidiary plans simultaneously. And until I have of sufficient detail from all of them, okay, that their inputs are of sufficient detail that I am now comfortably ready to say, this is how long it's going to take. This is how much it's going to cost. This is subsidiary plan Grand Central Stations 4.2. But as I mentioned in the first lecture, it's all based on the PDCA cycle, right? The plan, do, check, act cycle, right? That the more we know, and go back and revisit the beginning of the process. So this is pretty standard stuff to you, Jill, right? That and this is all based on the more we talk the more the meetings, the more we narrow our estimates, et cetera, the better our plan gets until we feel we're sufficiently of detail that we can move into execution. Where that line is going to change project to project. That's really, it's up to you, and we'll talk about some of the things that maybe help you get there. But we're building all these plans again. Let me show you how we do this. I kind of put in, you see these boxes I put in, pretend, for example, that they're the plans themselves. These are all the subsidiary plans that we're going to build all at once. Like I said, we're probably going to lean on a lot of historical data to fill in a lot of this in the first. But what's our first data dump to us? Comes from the project charter, does it not? So all the initial requirements, remember the elements of the project charter and our stakeholder requirements that we identified in our stakeholder register. So the two documents, the 4.1 and 13.1 that we created, okay, are the first set of data. And that data is common to all of our subsidiary plans. So a piece of data could mean something to scope and it means something else to resources, but it means something and it helps us. Everything we know helps us to at least get our projects all started. Right now, this is at the fair tree level, let's say, okay? And we're going to start now. We're going to go into our planning meetings, and we're going our emails for surveys and such. And the more that we know, the more that gets fed back to our buckets that are common to us. So the feedbacks come back to these buckets: project management plan updates, project document updates. I'm going to explain those in a minute. But what I'm saying here is that the more we know, they come back and they come back, and these are common. Every time we learn something, it's common to all of the plans. So we learn something new in the next meeting, and look, we fill in our plans fill in a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. The more we know, the tighter our estimates are getting, the closer we're getting to saying we're just about ready to take this plan into execution, and so forth. We know more and we know more until we fill in. Now, I'll tell you, in the real world, Joe, you're not going to get here. I don't think you're going to get to all of your subsidiary plans being fully complete before you actually take your plan into action. I mean, there's another problem is that you can't live in the planning processes. You want to do your due diligence and you want to plan and make sure that you put enough time in that you did a solid planning job. But you can't stay there forever. You really have to move. You have a client that's waiting. You have back end processes that are waiting for you to finish what you're doing. You don't have forever. You got to get this thing on the road and going, but you don't want to do it haphazardly. There's where the art comes in, is being able to get it to a point where you have sufficient information that all of your plans were able to chime in, and now you're comfortable to take this forward. You do this, that the feedback loops come back to those documents that I showed you up top. See the buckets that I use there? It's another term that I use just in this course. You're not going to hear it through the project management uh, lexicon or other project managers, just so I can explain the concept here to my students that they're buckets here. Every time I have a feedback, whether it's in progressive elaboration and planning or it's one of the CAPAs in execution, it comes back to here. It either affects one of the project management plan updates or one of the project document updates. So I'm revising and updating these documents with new information. These documents are common to all of my subsidiary plans and my 4.2 plan. So the more I know, the more I can grow, right? Until my tree has all the leaves on it. That's where I'm going with this. I want to show you those buckets. And this is maybe kind of to reinforce what I'm talking about. On the left here, as you can see, this is right out of PMBOK, and this is 4.1. This is the table I was telling you about that you might want to, if you're going to memorize or at least have some solid memory of. This is a good one to look at. Okay, it's 4.1. The elements of the project management plan and the documents. So let's look underneath of the project management plan. As you can see here in this column, many of them are those subsidiary plans, right? We're talking about the scope management plan, the schedule management plan, cost management plan, quality management. They're all part of the project, plus a few others that are part of the big project management plan. These are the rules of the road, okay? Of how we're going to handle each one of the areas. On the right, the two columns on the right are the documents that we're going to create now. And this is why I showed it to you this way, Jill. As we progress through the methodology and our planning, we're going to create documents. They're going to help us plan. Take a look at the documents that we're going to create. They make sense. We're going to make activity lists, are we not? Because when we get into scheduling, we're going to list our activities. We're going to change requests, change logs, risk registers, all of these quality metrics, these documents we're going to create and we're going to revise and we're going to update and we're going to constantly put new information in them. These are the buckets that once we find out new information and make these documents bigger and better, so is our plan on the left. See what I'm saying? To a sufficient point where we're ready to take our plan and we're comfortable to take our plan into action. These documents we're going to create we're going to create these as we go through the planning phase. So I want to show you them now. This is what we're doing. When we create these documents, the more we know about them, the more they firm up the overall plan to where we're ready to go. Okay. Let's take a look at 4.2 from a process standpoint. An input, and you're going to see this if you're looking for patterns for the test. One of them to remember is, like most good methodologies, the output of the previous process is usually an input to the next process along the line, okay? It's not always a steadfast rule, but it's a good way to try to, if you're going to try to do some memorization for the exam, some kind of brain dumping thing, you want to try to identify trends and patterns that'll help you with your memorization. This is one of them. So it would make sense, and I even showed you in the last diagram, that the project charter itself is an input to the developed project management plan. It would be, right? Because all those elements that we identified on the project charter that we need to know now, we're going to dive in deeper is what we're going to do. We're going to take that initial information and we're going to drill down into those requirements so we can define them for our project. That's where we're going next. Outputs from other processes. Showed you the diagram right out of Vargas. There's a whole lot of lines coming in and out of that little box, right? Lots of activity going in and out of the project management plan. The enterprise environmental factors and the OPAs that are at your disposal. But that, by the way, depending on how you use these things, can be constraints or they can be enablers. That, again, goes back to the art of project management. Knowing your organization and its culture can be, and knowing that and being able to leverage that for good is a good thing. So that's what I'm saying. Depending on how you play your cards, some things are constraints, some things are enablers. Maybe the very same thing is an enabler today and it's a constraint tomorrow, depending on how you played your cards and when you played your cards. Enough said. We'll talk more about that later. Again, we're in the planning process, and I told you you're going to see this time and time again, the same tool and technique, expert judgment. We're not going to talk about it here. We're going to talk about when we get into time management, when we're really digging open work packages, and I'm talking about experts. But remember, take expert judgment. These are humans and their opinions based on their experiences. So they are dated just like any other. If you can try to find other ways to verify what they're telling you, it's a good thing, okay? It lets you sleep at night. This is a good advice from me to you. Facilitation techniques, that big long list of things, you'll see it again and again. I'm not going to go over them all, but we're trying to get information. We're trying to drill down. So we're going to use those techniques. And the output is going to be our project management plan, right? And I would have jumped out and showed you from Vargas. But here's where we're going next, okay? We've started here in our initiation process group. We created our project charter. We created our stakeholder register. We're now ready to go into the planning phases, okay? So we've taken our information, and our first dump of data was these two documents through the project management plan and distributed out to all of the knowledge areas. I'm going to show you how we take it from here now. And we're going to start with scope. Remember that I'm telling you, we're developing all of our plans simultaneously. So as I'm building scope, I'm also building risk, and I'm also building quality. And you understand what I mean. Okay, I just showed you why and how on the last screen, but I can't teach them to you simultaneously, can I? So I'm going to show you scope, and I'm going to show you scope first because scope is boss. Okay, scope is boss. It's really, once we define scope, it's really what everything else is going to be based, or anything else I estimate, anything else I assume is going to be based on my good knowledge of scope. All right, so let's go. So let's go into that and think like a project manager. So when I say think like a project manager, and I'm going to say this through the whole course, like I said, I show you something, and I don't just show it to you so you understand it for the test. I also want you to think about does this benefit me? When would I use this, and why would I use this? And again, what are my benefits, and what are the consequences? All right. So you think like a project manager, getting your arms around scope. Like I said, the final thing. Oh no, it's almost part of your personality as a project manager is when you start to hear things, you want to try to get fences around them. Yeah, this sounds great. Wow, but what are the constraints around this? What is it that's actually going to finish this thing? I said this, I sound like a broken record, but I'm really not. It's good, solid project management to even think that way. Doesn't mean I'm trying to put a damper in any conversations. I don't. It's not what I want to tell people that they can't bring changes. I just want to think that way. Someone has to, and it's going to be me. Okay, so I'm going to think like a project manager, particularly when it comes to scope, that I want to try to define my scope the best that I can, because everything else I'm going to do is going to be based on my understanding. So I want to try to understand it. So to manage constraints, we need to establish baselines. We need to establish a baseline and say, this is in scope and this is out of scope. Now, I don't know, Jill, I guess are you familiar with the concept of the triple constraint?
I'm a little bit.
Okay, maybe I should quickly go over because it's important to know that this is the heart of every project. So we can get as fancy as we want in any project, talking about resources and quality and risk, and it's multi-phase, and every project at the heart of it comes down to this, the triple constraint, this triangle here of scope, time, and cost. So what is the triple constraint? The scope is the product itself that we're building, the deliverable of the project. Time is the schedule. Cost is our budget. And as good project managers, wake us up at 3 in the morning. This should be near and dear to our heart is the triple constraint. We're charged as project managers to manage our projects within inside the triangle. Now, I don't want to guess your age, Jill, but when I was in kindergarten, we had coloring books, right? And they didn't like it when I colored outside the line. If I was coloring and every now and then we don't like it in project management either, because we don't want to go outside. These are baselines that we established in planning. We said this is the scope, this is the schedule, this is the budget, all right? So we want to keep it to it. If we start to go outside of it, we're going to have to make some changes. We're going to have to make course adjustments. But this is how we do it. We measure against established baselines. That's how we know we're off course, because we set these baselines. And we establish these baselines with the input of all the other knowledge areas. I want you to know that we are going to baseline scope, we're going to baseline time, we're going to baseline cost. But we're not going to do that until all the other knowledge areas have sufficiently chimed in. That's why everything's being done simultaneously. But here's where we're going with this. We're trying to establish these three baselines so that when we take the project into and execute the project, we can measure performance. Okay? Scope is first of the constraints. Scope is boss. I want you to think about this, Joe, because it's the base of the triangle, right? Scope is boss. It's the base of the triangle, so the other two sides are predicated on the base, the size of the base. If I widened out the base, I would necessarily change the other two sides of the triangle. The other two sides of the triangle exist because of the base. In other words, the better that I can define the base of exactly what am I delivering, the better I can estimate how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. And something you should understand in the triple constraint is that if I change one side of the triangle, Jill, and that's why I want you to look at that lecture again, is that I will necessarily at least change one other side. So a good example is that if they want to add scope to this project, you're probably looking at adding more time and more costs, right? It just makes sense that if you change one side of the triangle, you're probably going to see a softball question to that effect on the exam. You change one side of the triangle, it will necessarily change at least one other side of the triangle. And this is just me talking now, my nearly 40 years, that I found that usually one of these constraints is immovable, Joe, in the client's eyes. In other words, either time or costs or scope, it can't be changed. It's drop dead, can't be changed. An example would be like I did in the first video where I talked about that I'm doing a Thanksgiving Day event. All right, that unless I don't care if you give me another week and it'll be perfect, I'll make it perfect. Not too late. It has to be on Thanksgiving Day. So the schedule is dropped. That I have to get it done on time. Now, or I have to get it done on budget. We don't have another dime. That's the one I see most of all. Is that the immovable one is the budget. Sometimes it's scope, but that's just my career, Joe. And I want to give you that to think about that. You're trading off. Remember that if I'm going to add time, I'm probably adding cost as well. And you're the voice of reason. So as you're adding stuff, if you're changing the scope, you have to account for it. That's your job to do it, to do that. Okay. And it's going to be asked about. It's changing. I don't have to explain how important change management is to you. All right. I'm going to show you what you need to know for your exam here. But it's about balancing trade-offs. So we're going to start with scope. The better we identify scope, the better our schedule and budget estimates are going to be. Okay. So let's jump right into scope management. Here's where we are in the process. And like I said, we're getting about knee deep now. All right. Into the methodology. Go about another about 40 minutes or so. I think we're going to get through work breakdown structures tonight, which is an important thing. Take a look at scope management. Now, before I leave the screen here, I want to make a couple of observations that are going to help you on the test. Okay. First off, this is typical of a planning knowledge area. That if you look at scope management, it's planning. If you see that the processes are broken up in the two process groups, that most of them are in planning, that we're going to plan something and then we're going to control it. We're just going to measure here. This is common, that we're going to plan something and then we're going to measure it once it's in progress. You're going to see this in scope. You're going to see this in time. You're going to see this in cost. You're going to see this in risk. Okay. This pattern here of the distribution of the processes across the process groups. I teach it this way because it makes more sense this way, that you can see the bigger picture here. Take a look. The other thing I want to show you is that there's a natural and logical progression here. Let's take a look at the four processes underneath and within the planning group that you're going to see this evening. All right. Skip past the dot one for a second here. From 5.2 to 5.4 is really the heart of scope management. All right. It really is and it makes every bit of sense that the first thing we're going to do is collect requirements. Then we're going to define those requirements. So the funnel, think of the funnel here. We're going to start with high-level requirements, and we're trying to get those requirements that are actually going to become part of this project, okay? So between 5.2 and 5.3, we're going to define those requirements. In 5.4, we're going to put it to paper. We're going to put it to paper to where it actually is a document that can be referred to as a baseline, okay? So that's where we're going with those this evening. The dot one is going to be pretty much the rules of the road. Like I said to you, These are the subsidiary plans themselves. So I'm going to call them affectionately the dot ones from now on in all of the knowledge areas, except for one or two little flies in the ointment, do this all the time. But the first process is the dot one, is the plan itself. This is the hows, wheres, whys, and whens of scope. How are we going to handle scope? Everything else is the process themselves. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump on in. We're going to define scope. All right, and so I want to talk a little concept here for a second. What does that mean? Let's say that the project is asking us to do an addition to the deck. Okay, so the addition to the house, and we're going to do this little deck project here that I'm showing you. The more I know about what the requirements are, the better I can come up with a schedule and a budget. The better I can schedule the guys that have to be here. The better I can schedule the material deliveries of my lumber and my nails and everything, and the wood finish and everything that I'm going to need for this. So I want to know all kinds of things, everything I can about this. I want to know the dimensions, right, on a project like this. I would want to know the materials that I'm going to use. I want to know the skill sets, the carpenter, the bricklayer, whatever I'm going to, who do I need for this project? The functionalities. Am I building in, lighting across the rails? Am I having electrical power run out? Am I having a barbecue pit built right in? So I want to know everything that's required. Even things like, do I need permits? And I want to know everything. I want to know everything. At this point, the more that I know about scope, the better. I am trying to get fences around this. And why? Because I need to come up with estimates of time and cost. So the more that I know about my scope, the better I can estimate it. And I'm going to show you how we're going to do this. But I need to answer the two questions that my boss just won't leave me alone. How long is this going to take, and how much will it cost? So the sooner that I can get, the deeper I can get into the scope and progressively elaborate it, the better. Okay. As good project managers, we're trying to get fences around things. So the funnel's a good metaphor for trying to take those high level requirements and get them down into the requirements that are going to make it into the project. And not only do they make it into the project, but we did them with those SMART principles in mind, that they can be measured and defined and traced, and they're actually attainable, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay. We have a real project that's going to have a real deliverable that has a high probability of success, because we're putting fences around things. We're defining things as early in the process as we can. The importance of scope management is this. It's probably going to be at least one softball question about scope creep. If you don't know what scope creep is, that's where things keep just, mysteriously being added to your project, right? We're adding this and we're adding, and you're like the straw that breaks the back, all right? Is because it's because you don't want this to happen. I'm not adverse to change at all. I think change is great. And when I was in construction, Joe, we made our fortune on changes. When we first got that in construction, they first get the bid, you want to keep your low bid. But you know that once you get into construction, the architect forgot things, the general contractor has the door swinging in the wrong direction or whatever. Once you get into construction, there's all kinds of changes, and that's really where you make your money. I'm not adverse to change at all. What I do insist on, what the methodology insists on, is that change is accounted for. Somebody brings a change to you that we need to do. We need to do an analysis of cost and impact, the impact of cost, time, scope. How is this change going to impact the project? And if it's big enough, you really should have it. And in fact, for the test, all changes have to be approved. All right. In the real world, I'm not going to nickel and dime my customer. But remember, I'm teaching you something for the exam. So when in the exam, when they're talking about changes, all changes need to be written up for a change order that take into account all the impacts of cost and time and scope and quality, okay? That's the right answer for the exam, all right? Control scope creep, because if you don't, it'll kill you and maybe kill you, the project manager, as well. Because if you're not controlling scope, your numbers, your project's going to take a life of its own, and it's going to be a monster. It's either going to have to be terminated early, and then maybe you're terminated early. Really, you don't let things get out of hand. Even the very best project manager can't control everything, but you have controls in place so that things don't get too far out of hand. They never do. If you're doing your job, you're on top of this, okay? And I'm just saying generically for the exam, it sounds like you have some very serious global change management with, and I know you do, highly, highly regulated in your business, Jill. So what I'm showing you here is really first grade stuff relative to that, but that's what you need to know for the test. So goody for you, right? So let's talk about an accurate scope baseline. It's critical. As I've mentioned, okay, it's the base of the triangle, right? So the other two sides are built because of the base. So what do I get? When I control scope, I get two good things, all right? I get accurate time and cost estimates in my planning phases. So as I'm planning and as I'm progressively elaborating and my estimates are getting tighter and tighter and tighter and higher and more credible, it's based on not just mine, but my experts and our collective understanding of what needs to be done, all right? I'm much more precise is the word. The other big advantage is that when I take this plan into action, I have an accurate way to measure its performance. I set hard baselines for budget and cost. And so as I'm at any given time in my project, I can take a snapshot. Where are we? Relative to my schedule, relative to my budget. Where am I? I can, because I did such a good job, I'm going to be pretty close. My project in the real world should be progressing pretty much as I planned it. Okay, this is what you don't want. You don't want a moving target, right? You know, so because moving target means, and I don't care how good you are, you're never going to be able to really truly plan ahead. If it's a project that's going to be 6 to 12 months long, you are having some risk. The longer something is, the riskier it is, okay, especially from a planning stage. Investors will tell you that long-term investments are a little riskier, okay? So they because they don't know what the future is going to hold. That's really what the point is. So you want to try to identify, and that's why when you finally baseline a project, if you're going to change it, it has to be done officially. Because once I've hit the nail in the head and say, this is it, this is where we're going, folks, any changes have to be accounted for. Okay, the scope baseline is the boss of the project from the standpoint that when you start to get into this, people say, no, the change I'm telling you, no, it's part of the scope, Clark. No, we actually created a 3-component scope baseline that if it's not in there, if it's not in one of the components, it's not in the original scope. Now you can argue whether I can give it to you for nothing and all that real world and everything later. But I'm saying that the lines in the sand are pretty much set. And you like it this way. This gives you the leverage later, okay, for that you established a solid scope baseline. The 3 elements of the scope baseline are these. There's a project scope statement. That's the first thing. It's a narrative of our, and it's pretty well detailed, section to section, describing our project scope, okay, and it's in pretty good detail. We got here because we defined our requirements, and I'll get there for 5.2 and 5.3, where we collected our requirements and we defined the ones that are going to get in. Once we did that, we had enough information to write this, our project scope statement. And I'm telling you, this doesn't have to be done from scratch. If our project's been done before, there's a similar scope statement. I'm not saying cut and paste. Let's not be lazy here. But I'm saying it's a lot that we can learn from and a lot we can use that it can keep us moving. We're going to spend time in planning. Don't let it be time that you didn't have to, that you could have used some, and it was credible to use, okay? Use it and use your time for the planning that you need to, the things that really need to be looked at by you. Project scope statement is the first element of your scope baseline. Again, it's a very well-written narrative of the scope itself, okay, and all of its elements. Are you going to have to write a scope statement for the test? No. You have to know of it and know what it is. That it's a narrative of sufficient detail that describes your scope, the scope of the project. The second element is what's called a work breakdown structure. We love these in project management. If you've never seen breakdown structures before, Jill, I think if you see one tool like I did with the House of Quality that really rolls your eyes back in the back end and said, this is a great tool. It's this one here. Breakdown structures are really powerful because they're effective and they're brilliant because they're simple. That's really the brilliance of them, is the simplicity of them. They can become quite complex, but I'm going to show you how that they're also simple at the same time. And they really keep you on track. They make you not miss anything. I'll show you what I mean by that. But the work breakdown structure is a depiction of the scope, broken down level by level from the top line project through its natural breakdown all the way down to its work packages. I'm going to tell you that and we'll show you that tonight. The third element is the work breakdown structure dictionary. The work breakdown structure looks like a pyramid, all right, if you've never seen it. So you can't put every piece of information inside the little boxes in the pyramid. So there's an accompanying document to the work breakdown structure. As I'm breaking down my big pyramid, my hierarchy, all the elements and the attributes of each of the levels and each of the elements within the levels are going to go in a separate document, the work breakdown structure dictionary. So the two here are complementary to each other. Actually, the third one's complementary to the second. The second one is really the one I use the most. And I'm going to break it out time and time again, because the work breakdown structure is a hierarchical depiction of the job itself, of the scope. What is exactly that we're building? That's great information for me as I'm planning my risks and my resources and my quality, because I'm planning all of those in the context of the scope that I'm building. So as I'm doing those breakdown structures, I'm laying them next to kind of side by side to my work breakdown structure. So I'm not missing anything. Areas of risk. I'm looking at the scope and I'm not missing areas of risk as I do that breakdown structure. That's the other part of the brilliance of breakdown structures. Anyway, for the exam, you need to know that the scope baseline, the base of the triangle, are these three elements here. This project scope statement, the work breakdown structure, and its associated structure dictionary. I also, let's talk about the importance of scope management other than scope creep. It ensures, and you're probably going to see this as a softball question, that the work necessary to complete and only the work necessary. That's what a scope baseline does. I think a client is well within their rights to ask to get exactly what he paid for. He's not crazy to insist to get what he paid for, but he might be a little crazy to ask for more than what he paid for. Just knowing where that line is, that this was in scope and this is not in scope, is so important. It also makes sure that as I'm planning my project, I'm only going to apply the company's precious resources to build the deliverable and only the deliverable, right? Only what we were contracted to do, only what I was chartered to do. You can change it if you like, but that's going to be a formal thing. I'm proceeding as if this is it. Okay, this is the scope baseline, and if you want to change it, it's got to be done formally. It establishes a scope baseline, which is the basis for the estimates for the other product. I've said that before. It's also used as the controlling device later. So it's the measurement and the control and the monitoring control. It's 11 processes for performance. It's the baselines that we're going to use to measure against. Okay. Also know that there's a project scope and a product scope. Okay, that there are scopes that you're not going to have to know the two, you just know of the two for the exam. Okay, let's look at the four processes within scope management. Let me take a quick time check here and see where we're at. Yeah, it's 10 after 8. We'll get through their work breakdown structure, and that's really where I wanted to end anyway tonight, and then we'll call it a night. So let's look at these 4 processes in scope management. Again, remember where we're coming from. We're starting with our project charter and our stakeholder register. So we have high level requirements, and we know our players are, et cetera, et cetera. We start to plan scope management. Remember, I told you the dot one process of all the knowledge areas. You're going to see it time and time again. Is not really a process itself. It's the rules for the rest of the processes within that knowledge area. So you're going to see that's common to every one of the knowledge areas, that it's going to be the rules of the road for that. Within, when we're talking about scope management, it's the process that creates the scope management plan, describes how the project scope will be defined, validated, and controlled. So everything we're going to want to know about scope: how does it get in? How is it defined? What measurements are we use? What methodology or things, et cetera, et cetera. What change processes are we going to use? These are all decided now and set. These are the rules. So later people can say, well, wait a second. No, no, no. You can't. It's like playing poker and trying to change. I mean, I'm telling you, you're going to get in some fights later. You know, you never said twos were wild. And yes, I did. It's in the rule book. Okay. We as project managers want to spend some time here in the dot ones, because these are the controls. Once the project begins to execute, these are the control. We want controls in place, not just so we can be Gestapos, but we need to know that things are moving along as they're supposed to, and within the performance guidelines that they're supposed to. Okay, so we're going to take our time doing these dot ones. The key benefit is that we get solid direction, and we actually have rules. We have measurements. We figured everything out. We thought about things ahead of time, and we set rules for them so that we can refer to them later. So when we talk about the process, and I'll whiz through, you can see the project management plan. So like I said, remember the output of the last process, usually the input to the next one. Not always, but it's a pattern. The project charter is also a direct input to these big planning processes, and they should be, right? And it should be, and those EES and OPAs. So that what about our organization before we start to talk about the scope? Again, the tools and techniques, again, you see the same ones again and again, and they're not slide rules. These are humans talking, thinking, their opinions, et cetera, et cetera. And those meetings of progressive elaboration, knowing more and more and more. Those techniques that are going to be used, the facilitation techniques, you don't see them here, but I'm telling you, you're going to use those. I want to drill down when we're talking about scope. I really want to know scope. I do. I don't want to live in this planning process, but if I'm going to really want to know one, this is it here. I want to know scope because, again, you know it's the base. My output is a scope management plan, and I have a second output, a requirements management plan. I'm going to talk about those two outputs here in a second. But remember that table 4.1 where I showed you the buckets? Remember that the left side was the project management plan and the elements of the plan itself. Here's 2 of them there. The outputs of the scope management plan is the scope management of 5.1 is the scope management plan, and the requirements management plan. Those are 2 elements of the project management plan itself. Okay, so remember that. Now let's talk about the outputs of 5.1. The scope management plan, like I said, is and you're going to see this time and time again, it's the rules. So it's a process we need to create a process for those detailed scope statement. Remember? So a process to create all 3 of the elements of the scope baseline. Really, that's what we're trying to do in scope management, is to create a baseline and manage to it. Know what we're doing, and you'll have that foundational understanding. So we're going to create processes, and they're detailed processes on how we're going to create the scope baseline and how we're going to maintain it, right? How we're going to maintain it, how we're going to validate it, how we might change it if we want to change it. The process for acceptance. At the end, remember this is scope. We're talking about the deliverable. So a process for acceptance, a sign-off process, the inspection processes, whatever it is that the official handoff that I'm giving the deliverable to my customer, my client, to my service department, wherever it's going next. Okay? Processes for how changes. You want to do this in all your knowledge areas. You want to have a process for how you do changes. You just don't want to say, let's just change it. Then why have a process at all? Why even have a methodology at all? It should be a process for changes. You want to control changes. Like I said, you don't want to stop change. You want to control change. You want to have your pulse, your finger on the pulse of change. The requirements management plan, the second output from 5.1, is a plan where it describes how the requirements. Remember, we told you 5.2 and 5.3 are two very key processes. I'm going to show you those next, okay? But they're basically the requirements that we started at that were high level. They had to be collected in a format that we can now use, and it had to be subjected to a process so that it was prioritized, so that we gathered them in like categories and prioritized the requirements and created metrics for success for the ones that are going to make it into our project. We decide all that in this requirements management plan. So these two outputs, these two are both elements to the project management plan. They're progressively elaborated. They're part of the plan all the way through close. Configuration management is part of requirements management, but it's really not ours. A lot of times this belongs to the engineers who are engineering the project. They're the ones that keep the configurations and version controls and stuff. But you need to know about this because you're managing a project around their needs and their tools and their everything that they might want to do. Know of their configuration managements and their version controls and such. Process to prioritize requirements because they're not all going to get in, right? We're going to do the top requirements for our project. And we're going to have metrics for the rationale. We have to be able to that finish line. We're going to set a finish line. What actually constitutes done? And we have a traceability. Again, it's the second time I've showed it to you. I showed it to you in initiation. I'm now going to show it to you here in planning. We want to be able to keep that line, that trace back from start to finish. Okay. So, and we're going to stay on deliberate. We're going to be kind of deliberate about it. All right. Now let's go into 5.2 and 5.3, the collecting requirements and defining requirements. Like I said, the collecting requirements, we're talking about the inputs, that scope management plan. The dot one is always an input to its subsequent processes within its own knowledge area. So of course, 5.2's input would have 5.1. The requirements management plan, the stakeholder management plan. We haven't created this yet. This tells you that we are indeed creating all of our subsidiary plans simultaneously. So when I say stakeholder management plan here, I'm saying whatever shape it's in at the moment I'm doing it. Remember, we're progressively elaborating. So the next time I visit this process, that stakeholder management plan might be more complete. But whatever state it's in at the moment, that's what I mean by it's as an input. Okay, so that stakeholder management plan right now, and it's probably in its bare bones. The project charter, bringing down all those initial requirements and milestones and risks and such. Of course, it's an input here. That stakeholder register that we also created. So you see the two big documents we created in initiation. We're going to use for our scope. Tools and techniques to our interviews, focus groups, facilitated workshops. All I'm doing is showing you this pretty much the same list of things. There's a couple of difference though. Prototypes. No, I think these are all on that list of doing a requirements collection here. Okay. What we're doing is we're just getting people to talk to us, right? Each person, each stakeholder has their interest in a project. They also have their expertise. So they may be the engineer, they might be the accounting people, they might be the end user. I want, when it gets to their areas of expertise, I'm really going to listen to them. I want to know, like the end user, for example, what do they want to see on the interface? The navigation through the application is important, all right? Is it intuitive? I don't want them confused. If they're confused, if the interface is confusing, they don't use it well, okay? They don't use it well, then the performance is down, and simply because we didn't design it well. We didn't listen to our stakeholders. So this is really what we're doing here with the tools and techniques. Round after round, medium after medium, data bit after data bit, we're creating the requirements that we're going to take to the next level. Our outputs are going to be requirements documents. For the test, you just need to know that you're creating requirements documents. But I'm telling you, there are templates for this in professional project management that will help you put together requirements documents so that they're standardized, okay? Because the next where you're going next in 5.3 is you're going to decide which ones get in and which ones get out are not going to get in. So you really kind of want to do some standardization here. You want to do some weighting here at this stage so that you and into the next so that you're actually comparing apples to apples, okay? That traceability matrix here is an output from 5.2 because we're continuing it. And again, here's that screen again of all the tools and such. I'm gonna leave it up for 10 seconds so that you can hit the stop button or the pause button if you're looking at it from a video. You don't have to know all these, you just have to know of them. And I would use them. Use them as a project manager if you're not. Okay? The outputs of 5.2 are those requirements documents that I talked. They show alignment of requirements, the organizational. Everything we do should have an alignment all the way back, not only to the project charter, but the charter itself was aligned all the way up through the chain of command to some bigger objective. That's why the project was chartered in the first place. It's measurable, it's testable, it's traceable, it's complete. You got to keep these things in mind, especially early in planning, okay? The finish line, the finish line. That's what we're doing, we're thinking about here. So when we're thinking about this, what I'm building so that I'm being as detailed as I can, I'm also thinking about the finish line. How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? Don't forget to include all the requirements that we talked about earlier. That you need to think about all the requirements. And you want to think about all the constraints and things. So those EEFs and OPAs, the other constraints about a project, you want to think about what the capabilities of your own organization. J&J is huge. You have an army of people. That's good and that's bad. An army of people means you do have a lot of resources, but a big bureaucratic place like J&J might be too slow for my taste, to get things done. But maybe they are. Maybe they've learned to streamline things. But I'm just saying big
Can I just make one comment about that, Clark, too? I was thinking, so, going from J&J, a big organization like that, to going to like a small organization, or medium size, like Otsuka, it's really challenging because you get a lot more leverage working for a larger company than you do for a medium-sized company with your vendors and things. So the project management, becomes a little more challenging.
Well, turn it around. When we get to vendor management and risk management, I'm going to tell you there's two sides of the table, okay? That you want to think like that as a project manager. In a small, what's that old Milton quote that it's better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. I'm telling you, I appreciate, I want to say smaller organizations because I have authority. I can personally get a lot more done than I can in a larger bureaucracy. So it depends on your point of view. I guess, yes, being a J&J, you do have a lot at your disposal is a nice thing. But I can tell you your leverage with your vendors, your outside vendors, are still the same. You're still tough Jill, and I'm not going to mess with you if I'm an outside vendor. You know what I mean? Especially when we get to vendor management, I'm going to show you how you use the contract to beat them over the head with. Okay? So I'll show you. I'll show you from my standpoint. But I'm glad you jumped in there because this is important. And they don't stress it here. I'm stressing it from a regular guy plain English standpoint that you really should know your organization and its capabilities. It's kind of important input to everything. What is your what can you guys really do? And how do you guys really do it? Are you notoriously slow? Are you you know what I mean? You know this in your own heart of hearts. Keep that in mind. And the traceability matrix, again, I'm just showing you it's kind of important, and it really is. It gives you, it's almost that, if you're going through a smoky room and they tied a rope to your waist, all right? That's kind of what you're doing with the traceability matrix, okay? So you can always find your way back, right? And you might want to do that. So we move into 5.3 now. So we've taken all those requirement documents, and we're going to actually produce this project scope statement, that first element. We're going to do that narrative now. So we're going to take that's a detailed description of the project and the product itself. What is it we're creating? Right? Which requirements are included and which ones are excluded? This is where we decide that here in 5.3. Okay? So we're going to consider all the deliverables, assumptions, constraints, and risks. we're going to, as you can see, we're being pretty deliberate right here, and we should be. We're in planning, and here's places, there's certain places where you really should be deliberate. This is kind of where one of them here is defining which requirements get in and which ones don't, okay? Because projects have to end, and they don't, you can't cure the whole planet's ills with one project. Really, if you're, that's another reason why I like small organizations, because I'm even a bigger voice of reason and reality than I am at a J&J. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm telling you, I'm the guy that's telling you, you're biting off more than you can chew in the beginning, and they actually listen to me and break it up into 2 projects or 2 phases or something, but they listen to me. Okay, that's a living document, the project scope statement, until we get to such point as we actually baseline it, as we say we're done. This is the scope baseline, and that's it. Anything else that's added is going to be change order. Okay, but this is progressively elaborated, just like every other plan that we do in the planning phases. Okay, so let's look at the process, and then we'll move into work breakdown structures, and we're going to knock off. The scope management plan, I told you the dot one is always an input to its subsequent processes. The requirements documents that we just created as the output of 5.2 is the input to 5.3. See the pattern there? The OPAs, and I don't know why they don't have the EEFs here. I guess the OPAs, because here at this point now, I've gotten past the 30,000 foot level, and maybe I'm now using, structure. Okay. Again, the tools and techniques. What do I have? Expert judgment. We'll talk about that in the next lecture. Product analysis. This is really a good time here between these next couples of tools and techniques. The point here is that I'm looking at other ways to skin the cat, right? If I'm going to come up with alternative ways or a different way to look at the project, now's the time to do it. Now is the time, because once I continue on and progressively elaborate the idea that I'm working on, that's where we're going. I mean, I can change it later, but it's very costly to change something that's already underway. We know this. This is the time to look at the other alternatives. If there are any, this is the time, okay? So that's the point of those tools and techniques. And the output is that first level, the first element of the scope baseline, all right, is the project scope statement itself. All right, that narrative, that well-written narrative based on the requirements that made it into your document. You're not going to have to write one of these. Just have to know of it and know of its detail. And I'm telling you that. So what I just told you is what you need to know for the exam. Project document updates. What do you know? This is the first of those buckets, right? So this is where I'm talking about the progressive elaboration. This is the effect of progressive elaboration that we're running this process time and time again, 5.3. So we're running all of our planning processes for a while until we get there. Every time we do, we're going to update our documents, which is common knowledge to everything else, right? There's your first view of a bucket update. All right. Here's the outputs, the project scope statement, common understanding for all stakeholders here. This really should be a document that gets signed off on a lot of projects. You're actually signing it off and stamping it and blessing it and all that kind of stuff. And smaller companies, maybe not. But remember, you want to keep all these kind of elements in the project to get to here, because you're going to need to have at least this much in it so that you can build the work breakdown structure. So I want to tell you, you say to yourself, you're asking me, Clark, how do I know that I did enough in 5.2 to move on to 5.3? And how do I know I've done deep enough in 5.3 to move on to 4? You just keep progressively elaborating, okay? Knowing that you have to have at least this detail, at least these elements, to be able to move on. You have to have some knowledge of these to move on at least the first round, okay? To move into a work breakdown structure. I like to think of risks too, but it's not going to be on the exam. Now let's talk about work breakdown structures. What time is it here? It's 8:30, so let's do this, okay? A work breakdown structure is the second element of the scope statement, of the scope baseline. As you can see, Joe, it's a depiction. Here, it's in a like a pyramid, a hierarchy, and it's a breakdown. People have always asked me, Clark, how do you, especially when we did construction and some of the projects that you're doing, they're long-term, they're multidisciplinary, all kinds of people doing all kinds of things at all kinds of different times of the day. And Clark, how do you keep it all straight? The answer is bite-sized. Bite-sized. I break things down chunk by chunk, piece by piece. I start at the top and I break things down level by level, chunk by chunk until I get it down to handleable, manageable pieces. That's the work, the third levels down here, bite-sized, just like those little candies you get on Halloween. Okay, this is how you take a huge endeavor and plan it. You break it down to its bite-sized pieces. Each bite-sized piece now is small enough and comprehensive enough that I can be precise. I can be precise at a bite-sized level, right? Of each of the tasks that need to be done, the durations, the costs, the tools, the materials, everything, because I broke it down to the little bite-sized pieces. And then I add all the little bite-sized pieces together and I come up with a schedule and a budget. It's it's a little more complicated, but that's the concept. That's the regular guy concept here. That's how it's done. This is the power of breakdown structures, Jill, is that it's done in a bite. So let me show you what I mean. It starts at, there's three levels that you're going to need to know for the exam. This is a credential in and of itself doing breakdown structures and doing scheduling, okay? But it's powerful. For the exam, this is what you need to know. Level one's the project itself. It's the widget management system. That's the project itself. Level two is the first natural breakdown. It can be broken down any way you want to break it down. You want to start to break it down. Here, the work breakdown structure, you're trying to identify scope. So you're looking for areas where you're going to create scope. So here, it made sense to use the process groups as a second level. But you might do it in phases. You might do it in major deliverables. There is no hard and fast rule about how you break a job down. The rule from Clark to you is that you look at your project. Remember, you're going to, as you're here, I'm trying to break it down so I don't miss scope. I don't miss elements of the scope. Later, I'm going to be breaking down the job, looking for elements of risk, looking for elements of resources. So what makes sense for my project? I'm going to continue to break it down level by level till I get down to the actual activities that it's going to take to build the scope. And that's where I stop. All I do is I'm going to identify the scope down to where I'm actually going to see the activities that it's going to take to build the scope. And that's where I stop here in scope management. That's what you need to know from scope management standpoint, that there are three levels. The first level is the project itself. The second level, which is really a key decision, okay? The first natural breakdown of the project itself. After that, you continue to break it down, break it down, break it down to get down to those bite-sized pieces, which are the activities. The activities. We're going to figure those out in other when we get to time and cost management. Here, we're identifying scope. So we stop our what's called decomposition, that breakdown. We're going to stop when we get down to activities. We're breaking, so that's where we stop and we pass it on to the next knowledge area. The work packages. When we identify work packages, we're done identifying the work breakdown structure. Let me show you. It's a hierarchical decom, just like I showed you, and it's deliverable based. The upper levels represent the major components. The lower levels represent the activities. So for the test, that's what you need to know, that level 3 are the work packages. So on the test, you might see level 3. They might say level, that's what they mean, work packages. If they say work packages, they mean level 3. That's what they mean on the exam. The work packages, then again, since they're bite-sized, we can actually break them down and schedule them and estimates of time. We're nice and precise, aren't we? Okay. The work breakdown structure that I just showed you, pound for pound, is probably the most single powerful document in the project because it's so precise. I want to show you one more screen. I want to go past this. I'll come back to this because we'll start Thursdays, but I want to show you this, that I break this down into the work packages. I want to show you how a work breakdown structure works and why I think it's so great. Because it's from top down, as we're breaking it down, Jill, okay? we account for everything. As we break it down level by level by level, see how logical that is? We tend to, we're going to account for everything. It's almost like taking a deck of cards and turning them on face up on the table in front of us. We're not going to miss anything. So as we break the job from top down, we account for everything. So top down, we account for everything. What does that mean? We identify all of our scope. We've identified it. We didn't forget anything. Once we break it down into the work packages, we're going to account for everything bottom up. So let's show you the top down. We started to decompose. It's called the 100% rule. By the way, the level 2, the level below always supports the level above. Once you complete the level below, you've completed the level above. That's how these structures work. That makes sense, right? So when we account for, we do this as we're breaking the job down with the 100% rule. Then we account for everything we're going to need to do to create that scope, right? So we also, when we decompose top down, we're accounting for everything on the job, okay? Once we've accounted for all the work packages, we're going to go bottom up. We're going to roll up those estimates. Those bite-sized pieces that we were able to estimate, we're going to roll those up. And our estimates roll up like this. And we just add them all up. All of our estimates of time and costs roll up because we broke the job down, top down, and we missed nothing. And then we bite-sized estimated it precisely and roll it all the way up. This is brilliant and it's powerful and it misses nothing. It's the 100% rule because it compels you level by level to account for everything, top down, bottom up. Do you see what I'm saying about this, Jill?
Yep.
Very powerful and is applied many times in the methodology. And if you're not using this to logically break things down, you should. See how much this looks like an affinity diagram in the first place? It does. Because the top would be all the brainstorming broken out into categories. The categories even broke down even further. It's exactly the same. It's very logical. Top down accounts for everything. Bottom up estimate rolls up accounts for everything. Roll for time and costs. It's a beautiful thing. And as we're doing the similar breakdown structures when we get to the other knowledge areas, we're using this to guide us, to make sure that we're not missing anything in those. We lay the two next to each other, side by side. Okay? This is where we're going to stop. I'm not even going to get control accounts because it's getting a little late. I wanted to introduce to you, at least get us this far in the planning process and introduce work breakdown structures, show you how they work before we knock off. Any questions, any observations, anything at all, Jill, from what I've showed you tonight?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
good. Is this working for you?
yeah.
Good.
That's very good.
Good. That's the important thing. I might send out, and this is for the benefit of everybody, when I said I would send out some homeworks and stuff, sometimes I'm going to send you a couple of problems, or a couple of things. I don't think I'm going to do that the first weekend, but when we get into some of the other things, I will. And I do that. I only send out 2 or 3 because if you can do 2 or 3, you can do 7, right? So there's no sense me giving you 7. Besides, we're all busy professionals, particularly you. You sound like you're really busy. But every now and then I'm going to send you stuff to reinforce. And then you're going to, and that'll help you decide that hey, Clark, I need to ask some extra questions. I want to make sure you're getting it, Jill, and everybody else that you're getting it. So every now and then I might say, it's not required. I'm not really your teacher. It's going to give you a mark. You're going to pass the test. I send it out to you. You do it if you can. You don't if you can't. Okay. That's how it is. Otherwise, I mean, I'm here. Like I said, I have a rule that my students are my students for life, Joe. And I tell everybody that, and you too, you're included. So as you finish my class, if you're really, especially those like you that want to go right after the credential, Aubrey's another one that's going to go after it as soon as possible. I'm right here for you. okay, to help reinforce these videos are here for, and so am I. So if you don't have anything else, I guess I'm going to stop the recording now.